Movement Redefined, the large version, it really is my life's work. 8 years of work. It's got so much material in it. It's time to do a smaller version. I always like to go deeper into the science than not deep enough. What's cool about this, and I want to just throw this out there right now, this book is free.
I like to ask, what is the goal?
Yeah.
What is the main reason why you're doing this thing, right?
I want to change as many lives as possible. I want to have the biggest impact. I had never thought I would be giving away free books. Guys, welcome to the Right Angle Podcast. We have a good one tonight. Lots of practical application in terms of strength training and what it looks like. My co-host, Jonathan Moore. Jonathan, we're pumped about this one because this is really just going to give the audience a chance to understand what our training looks like practically. Like
For sure. The big seven movement patterns.
Big seven movement patterns. It's going to give a clear picture of like when we train people, whether it's athletes, whether it's just general populations, even training ourselves, what that looks like, how we take the movement patterns, how we do them, how we apply the 90-degree eccentric isometric principles that we've been going over, and all the other elements that are in the book. And guys, if you haven't had a chance to check out the new book, Movement Redefined Fundamentals, it's completely free. It's on my website. All you got to do is download it. It's there. There's no charge, no strings attached. So this is what we've been going over. And, we kind of went over some of the science, obviously. The first few chapters started taking some of that science and explaining how that applies more practically. But now it's like we are really in the hardcore application mode of chapter 6 and 7. So I think this will be good. So let's just jump into chapter 6. Chapter 6, for people who don't have the book in front of them, that's just called Mastering the Big Seven. Those are the fundamental movement patterns. Walk us through, you know what they are. Walk us through what those 7 are.
Exactly. So yeah, the big 7. So how we like to do it generally is split the lower body into the 3 and the upper body into 4.
Right.
And so the lower body being the squat, the hinge, and the lunge. And the upper body, you got your horizontal pull, horizontal press.
Which are basically like a row and chest press.
Exactly. And then vertical pull and vertical press, right? Being a pull-up, shoulder press, things like that.
Right.
So that's generally the main categories of how we split up the lower body and the upper body.
Exactly.
And how that covers the majority of the basic stuff we do.
Exactly. That literally covers
a massive foundation. That is the
80
foundation.
to 90%. 90. We're at 90 again, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But 80 to 90% of what we do, not just on our own training, but every athlete or client that we have, our programs, our workouts will always involve the big 7, and then there might be some additional bonus things which we'll get into, but we have to cover those big 7 because, and this is kind of moving along in the chapter, but if you master the big 7 movement patterns, these 7 that we talked about, you essentially have mastered your movement in general, because if we kind of break down other movements, whether it's running, whether it's things like throwing, punching, you can basically take the big 7 and
They apply.
They apply.
Yep. They're applicable in what you do, and especially if you're playing sports.
Yep.
It's going to come across
right
somehow, some way, inevitably.
Exactly, because if something's off in your movement patterns, it will be addressed somehow or somewhere just by looking at the big 7. And if you fix the big 7, you're going to fix your movement patterns for pretty much all other movements. Now, it's not to say we don't occasionally throw in, rotational movements and whatnot, but if you master the big 7, you nail those down, you lock them in, your rotational movements, whether it's golf, tennis, baseball, they're going to improve substantially. And then just by simply practicing your sport, it's going to transfer.
Oh, no, there's another good point is that when you master those 7 movements and you have a good foundation, you know what you're doing, it sets everything else in the rotational oblique sling, plyometrics, things like that. You'll just get so much better at that already. And then when you keep doing those things, you get better at that.
Exactly.
So it just makes you get better at everything, honestly. So
I see a big mistake that a lot of strength coaches fall prey to. I used to do this a little bit, is that they'll start athletes on these advanced plyometrics without having mastered the big 7 movements like the squat, like the lunge, and you see their knees caving in, their feet are rotating out, their spine is collapsing, and then if you have an athlete who's in that situation and they're displaying those dysfunctional patterns, they're asking for an injury by doing explosive, high impact, high load scenarios like plyometrics. So, and it's impossible to really fix their form on the plyometrics because it's happening so quickly. You have to break it back down to what? The big 7 again. Fix their squat, then you'll fix their jumping mechanics.
No, for sure. And then also I think you're not optimizing on performance.
Exactly.
You have a great athlete that jumps super high and they're dysfunctional. So it's like, oh, everything's great, but they still have capacity to get better. So when you were able to get those 7 movement patterns down, you're maximizing everything.
Exactly. Yeah. Just because they're explosive doesn't mean they can't get more.
Capacity to get more. And mastering the big 7 is essential.
That's the key. Mastering the big 7. And this chapter 6, we're not going to spend too long in this because it's people can see it when they actually download the book. There's pictures there, there's cues, there's video tutorials. The podcast format doesn't lend itself particularly well to going over exactly how to do each and every exercise, but there are a few things that we do want to cover. I know we were talking a bit before this about the lunge because there are some subtle intricacies involved with the lunge that I think lend itself well to this type of discussion.
For sure.
You were mentioning to me, or just talk to the audience what we were talking about earlier in terms of the back.
That's great. That's great. And the lunge, probably a little bit more technical than the other, like the hinge and the squat, right? You know what I mean? So it adds a little bit more thought to it. But I know one thing that we stress that's vital to doing a lunge as best as you can is keeping that back heel tall.
Yes.
And how that takes pressure off the knee, the low back, and really set yourself up to sink into that hip.
Yeah, the back heel elevated, really keeping it tall, keeping the foot, often thinking about keeping the foot perpendicular to the floor. Like you said, going through that big toe, it transfers all the weight into that front leg. And if you think about a lunge or a split squat or any type of stride mechanics, you're trying to load the front leg. It's basically a broken down version or deconstructed sprinting mechanics.
Exactly.
And when you sprint, you transfer weight from the back leg to the front leg repeatedly. So if whatever leg is in front, we want to load that leg, and that's why we elevate.
That's why the lunge is like you were saying. You alluded to it briefly. Is that the lunge is just so important in terms of simulating your running.
Yes.
So it's like obviously people do lunges to work out and things like that, not with the mentality of running, but especially for athletes and things like that, you want to get better at running and what you're doing. Got to be able to do the lunge correctly. Yeah. And it's so important to keep that heel tall, to put that pressure in that front leg.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Done correctly.
Yeah.
And that back heel has to be tall. So that's great stuff.
And you mentioned the oblique slings earlier. It helps to complete the oblique slings firing pattern because it takes, and to kind of go over
that X.
Once the heel elevates, we want to close off that back knee and fire that back adductor, and that's back to the big toe, right? Because the big toe and adductor, they fire together. Well, what does that do? It crosses over so that you're loading the front leg, but now you're loading into the glute of the front leg. It's that X, like you said. So I think that heel elevation is key. And I think even kind of like what you were saying, if I often say this, and I still stand by it, that if you could only choose one movement pattern to master that would have the biggest impact on form, especially for athletes and even joint health, you could definitely make a strong argument for the lunge or the split squat because of how many muscles are involved. And as you said, how the transfer is to sprinting or walking even, if you want to fix someone's gait mechanics.
No, exactly.
There's one other thing I want to take a second to go over. I don't even know if we've talked about this before. In the field of motor learning and motor development, okay, they've done studies on skill acquisition because this whole concept that we're trying to get people to understand is that we want to improve or master your movements, right? We want to clean technique up because when we do that, not only is it healthier on the joints, but you can lift more weight, you can stimulate more muscle growth, and your longevity is better. But it all comes down to movement mastery, which is in the laboratory/clinical setting or science setting. It's known as skill acquisition. That's what they refer to in motor learning and motor development. So they've done these studies on free throws, and even they'll use dart throwing. And people often think, okay, well, if you want to get better at free throws, you sit at the free throw line and you do 50 shots or 100 shots of free throws just back to back to back and get in this groove, and you can really master your technique. And what they've shown with the literature is that, yes, right then and there, your percentage will increase of the free throws that go in. But you actually didn't do that much to improve skill acquisition or mastery of that skill because you're too much on autopilot. You're not having to think as much. You're not having to use the mind as much, which we always talk about. That is so important, right? So what they found in the research is that when you take something like a free throw, have the athlete do a few, maybe 1, 2, or 3, then they go do a layup, then they do a three-pointer, then come back to free throws, they're out of the groove. Now, their percentage at that exact practice session might not be as good, but their skill acquisition, the improvement and effect that it has on their movement mastery for that free throw is going to be improved, and then they're going to get better. Their percentage will start going up, and we want the same thing for movement when it comes to exercise.
Yeah.
So the more cognition, the more mental engagement, the more thinking that's involved, the better. Now, here's why I'm getting at this, is because people often ask, well, why don't we just do barbell squats? Why do we do so many different squat variations? Now, is it necessary to do, 20 different squat variations?
Probably not.
But you want to have at least a handful, and you also want to periodically throw in novel stimuli. This is what I'm getting at, the novel stimuli. Because I say in the book, 80% of the time, focus on the fundamentals.
Right, but the other 20%, what are you going to do there?
That's what we're talking about. We're talking about that other 20%. And so by occasionally throwing in unique and novel stimuli, it forces your mind to work harder. You can't go on autopilot, and that mental engagement they've shown is key for movement mastery, and they've shown it's huge for building cognitive reserve and for building resistance against cognitive damage. Is basically how you keep your mental faculty sharp throughout the lifespan. So if we're talking about using exercise to enhance cognitive function,
no doubt.
You want to challenge your mind when you're training. So what I'm getting at here is include a few variations that you cycle through. Don't just do barbell squats, because we don't want to just get good at a barbell squat. We want to get good at squats, period, right? So that requires a few variations. Like, you were talking about the other day when you're training some of your clients, you have maybe some of your go-to variations,
for sure.
But you will occasionally still throw in unique variations once they've gotten a little closer to mastering.
Especially people I've been training with longer and things like that. We definitely had those in, on a good basis, on a consistent basis. So
I see like what you do with AJ, your pro golfer. He's pretty advanced now, and I do see you periodically giving him some very tough, unique exercises. But because he's mastered the basics and the fundamentals, he can do those advanced variations.
And it's just a reminder, I think, to people as well that are listening to that. It doesn't take a year to master those 7. It's really not that long.
Exactly.
A couple of good weeks of focus, you get good at it, and then you obviously continue to master, just like you are still, right? Better and better. But you get what I'm saying. The big, large portion of understanding those 7 movements. You focus for a couple of weeks, a month, figure that out, man. You got it down. And then it's going to help you with everything else. So
Exactly.
It's a reminder. It doesn't take a 10-year crack.
No.
Like, if you do those things that we've been telling you, feet, core, posture, lock it all in with all those movements and the cues there, you'll be set.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I almost forgot. We were about to move on to chapter 7. You just said feet, core, posture. In the book, and I mentioned this briefly in the book, that we've laid out the different cues for people to master their squat, to master their lunge, to master their shoulder press, and so on and so forth. But I say something at the beginning, I preface this saying, okay, all these cues are important, but if you lock in your posture, your feet, your core, you'll probably end up finding those cues naturally on your own. But those cues, I listed them just to kind of give people like some parameters of so they don't go too far out and drift too. But if you focus on, those
it's
3,
a big majority.
It's a big majority.
And when you do those 3, even if you do some of the others wrong or it's not the best, you're still on the right track to get there.
Still on the right track.
You can fine tune and do there. Then you want to take the next level. You do those small other cues.
Exactly.
But man, feet, core, posture, you can't go wrong.
Feet, core, posture, can't go wrong. And if something is off and you're having trouble with one of the cues, go back to those 3 things. However you want to think about it, whether it's the feet first or core first or posture. I usually like to go head, then kind of trickle down, and then to the feet, then the core. There's different ways you can do it, but those are the key principles with that. Like I said, I don't want to dwell too long on the actual exercises. Real quick, actually, the upper body stuff. We talked about the elbow position.
Well, it applies to all 4.
All 4 of the upper
Your
body
elbow
movements.
position. You don't want to over tuck. You don't want to over flare. Shoulders down and back, head tall. That's how we're going to find our lat.
Yes.
And put our shoulders in the right spot for the most engagement and the most therapeutic results. You know what I mean? And that applies to the 4 in the upper body.
Yes.
The horizontal pull, push, vertical pull, push, same thing. So
Exactly.
It's just key.
Yes.
The elbow position applies on all of them. So.
And like you said, find the posture in the shoulder position, and the elbow position will follow.
Right. Well, if you don't do the posture, the elbow position won't follow.
Yeah.
So get that locked in. You'll find the right elbow
Or
position.
their elbows might look like they're in the right position, but they'll have shoulder crowding. Then they'll be complaining, well, why are my shoulders hurting? I'm tucking my elbows. But they tuck their elbows without first addressing posture and shoulder position. I think we should move on to chapter 7, because I think there are some interesting things in here. I mentioned the first thing. This is chapter 7: training protocols, programming, and periodization. Practice makes perfect. I would probably modify that now. That
perfect practice makes
perfect.
Go.
Exactly. Because if you practice something incorrectly, even if it's off just a little bit, you are ingraining some bad habits. So, what I'm getting at with that is the focus on full body. We do full body for every workout. Now, we might emphasize something different. And actually, the last few weeks, just to give people kind of some context to what I've been doing, just playing around with it because I've been training for so long, I have been emphasizing different areas of my body at different workouts. For example, Sunday, the last few weeks, I've been emphasizing legs a little bit more. Monday, a little bit more chest. Tuesday, a little bit more back. Wednesday is more of an explosive workout. Thursday, a little more shoulder emphasis. Friday, more arms. But each workout
Joel works out 8 times a week.
Yeah.
If you can't tell.
Exactly. And then Saturday is just very light, full body activation. But I'm still doing the big 7 movement patterns pretty intensely on all those days, just a slight emphasis. So, for example, on the shoulder emphasis day, my RDL might be an RDL with a high pull, because what's a high pull get? It gets a little bit more shoulders and traps, right? And then my chest press, I might do a higher incline press, because yes, I'm getting the chest, still working the horizontal pressing pattern, but I'm getting a little bit more shoulder involvement. So there's modifications you can make if you want to emphasize different muscles, like kind of traditional bodybuilding style. But most of the time for our athletes, it's pretty much just focus on the big 7. We don't emphasize an area more than the other usually, but you can. But the perfect practice makes perfect. The reason why I said that is, and that's why it goes back to training full body, because that gives you a chance to practice things more frequently.
Yeah. So yeah, that's right. You kind of sharpen that pencil. You know what I mean? Don't let it go dull. You know, if I don't cover that one pattern in the next 10 days, for example, the pencil's going to go dull, though. It's the same with your movement.
Exactly. Patterns. So people that train their legs once a week, it's like, man, you're only practicing those 3 movement.
We talked about it. People that do it once, like people that are training consistently. They train hard, they're strong, things like that. Once every 15 days.
Yeah,
and then sometimes 20. I'm like, whoa.
Especially if they're on some of the old school Mike Mentzer high intensity protocols. It's like, yeah, you're giving yourself lots of recovery, but you're never going to master your movement training that infrequently, and you're going to constantly have dysfunction and compensation patterns that you're never going to be able to address. You are.
It's a lot of days of not, pumping your legs.
Yeah, for sure. And so in terms of, if we're moving on in the book, it talks about when to incorporate heavy loads. Not every workout has to be
sure. I think it's important.
Very heavy.
It's very important to know. You know what I mean? It's like you just talked about, you were doing, if I remember correctly, leg Sunday based up from the big
emphasis.
7. Emphasis, exactly right. So Sunday the legs, Monday the upper body, Tuesday was what?
Tuesday's a little bit more more back, Monday's more chest.
And
but
then the Wednesday explosive, things like that.
Yeah.
You're not going to be able to go 90% plus
every single
time. You're just not. You know what I mean? So it's just making sure people understand when to do that, how to do that.
I've done that before, and I've done it just to experiment. And the result is that my body doesn't hurt because the form is still locked in. The result is I feel tired.
For sure.
And so you're just not getting as much out of it.
Especially someone who's training a lot.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to note, as we mention all the time, like for us, it's just, bread and butter, but like activation workouts. It doesn't have to be that 45 minutes to an hour of just heavy weights. Exactly. It can be 15, 20 minutes just body weight. Locking in the main things, go there, eyes open, eyes closed. Some light dumbbell stuff, some other body weight material. Like that's important to add in there if you want to be the best you can.
Well, my Saturday workouts, I often
that's basically what that is.
I'll take 10, 15, 20-pound kettlebells, and I'll just go through those 7 movement patterns. It takes 15 minutes, done. But I sharpened the skills, got some good activation in, and now when I go and lift again on Sunday, I feel even more locked in and more recovered because of that 15-minute light workout. So, but I do recommend generally at least once a week pushing the intensity and pushing the loads if possible, if you have that capability. But something that we talk about this a lot, that for our athletes and even for ourselves, we want to go as heavy as possible when we can while still being therapeutic. Right? We don't want to get into that contra-therapeutic zone where the movements feel like it's breaking down our body, or it's degrading our joint health, or it's causing our nervous system to just get fried because we're just grinding through every rep, kind of like the Winston reps,
He'll figure it out.
He'll figure it out. He grinds through it.
You can put 10 plates on the bar. He'll find a way. He will find a way to get it up.
Exactly. So when you go heavy, you still want to have clean, crisp reps, and it shouldn't fry your body. So go as heavy as you can if that's your style and you want to build some good muscle mass and strength, but it needs to be therapeutic. If it's not therapeutic, you're ingraining bad patterns.
It comes down to the cues.
Yeah.
Form and the cues,
Exactly. That's another point in here is avoiding excessive fatigue.
That plays hand in hand.
Yeah, exactly.
Because if not, then you're breaking your body down to another level. Then it's going to snowball. You're going to have fatigue. You're not going to be able to train as much as you want, as intense as you want, as heavy as you want within a week cycle, and then a month cycle, and then, et cetera, et cetera.
Exactly. Well, this goes to the discussion of the rep range. And I get this question a lot.
Reps.
Yeah, 20 reps.
20 reps.
When's the last time we did 20 reps? Ever?
Yesterday.
Yeah. We keep the reps low, usually around 2 to 6, because we are trying to keep quality high. We're trying to keep fatigue relatively low. Now, at the end of a workout, we might do some high rep finishers or something like that. But generally, 2 to 6 rep range, because it gives us enough quantity to practice the reps, okay, and it gives us enough volume and time under tension to build muscle. But it's also low enough where if you know you have a set of 3. I was talking to Rami about this yesterday.
Your output's going to be more. Your cognition's going to be more. Your focus, your drive's going to be more. And then as a result, it's going to produce better results. So the efficiency of what you're doing, Rami broke that down.
Yeah.
I don't remember exactly what it was, but basically it was he can get the same out of someone in 3 reps than he would them doing 10.
Exactly.
With not that same amount of force, drive, and cognition.
Exactly.
And that tension. You know what I mean? So,
exactly. If you know you have 3 reps that you have to nail your form down, you're going to really focus. You're going to attend to what you're trying to do. If I say, hey, go do 3 sets of 12 and try to incorporate all those technique cues we just went over,
there's going to be a couple of sets.
Nobody's going to be able to focus maximally. I don't care who you are.
Every single rep, not happening.
It's not happening. I want to talk about the circuits and how we pair up exercises, because this goes back to the whole topic of the free throws, and interspersing different types of activities, and you're not just doing the same exercise over and over again.
Exactly what I was thinking. I knew we were going to touch on that in chapter 7, but it's the same thing, and that's why we do with our workouts with ourselves and the clients that we have. We don't just only stay on the squat.
Yeah.
Sometimes, every once in a while, but generally speaking, both of us, it's into that circuit flow. It's into that cognition. It's now into their form.
Exactly.
It's not the same thing in the redundancy over and over again.
And there are even other reasons for that besides that phenomenon that we went over, by the way, for people who are interested in looking at PubMed studies on that's called contextual interference. I'm not going to get into why it's called that, but if they want to look that up in terms of the practice. But we rely on contextual interference for our workouts, like you said. So we create circuits. So we'll do like a squat. Okay, we'll rest maybe 30 to 60 seconds. We'll go do a row, and then rest 30 to 60 seconds again, then a chest press, and then we might cycle through. So as you mentioned, that gives us a chance not just to force our minds to work harder, because once you come back to the squat, now you have to separate that movement from the other ones that you just did. You have to retrace your steps in your nervous system. You have to reprocess what's going on. You have to go over those mental blueprints again, and then you have to do the exercise. The level of mental focus is way higher than, like you said, if you're just staying at squats. But it also allows for local recovery of that particular muscle while still getting a good workout and a nice flow and structure, because it's like, okay, my heart rate's still going, but by the time I come back to my squat, it's been 4 or 5 minutes. My legs are fully recovered, but I'm still like going through the workout and actually doing things like back before chest. It's pairing up antagonist muscles every time.
The core in there,
exactly.
And the legs with the squat, then to the core, the back, the chest. You're saying that local recovery is
exactly. The local recovery is key, because if it's not recovered, not only are you fatigue is the enemy of motor programming. If we're trying to fix someone's technique, we have to get to their motor programs and refine them. But if they're fatigued, they're not going to be able to do that. But also, if you have local fatigue in the muscles, you can't lift as heavy. So your ability to grow muscle, to build strength and power.
Local fatigue and that cognition.
Yes, that's what it comes down to. It's both the local fatigue and the cognition. So that's what we're trying to optimize when we're doing these workouts. And sometimes we will take as many as 4 or 5 exercises, but you need to have usually at least 2 exercises that you alternate between. But even like if you just did a row and a chest press, row, chest press, which we have done, there is research showing that doing the row before your chest press helps the chest press be more powerful and explosive, 100%. Because it teaches you to fire your lats. So when you go to the chest press, you get better co-contraction. So the whole, the way we do these circuits, it has a rhyme or reason. I do want to emphasize, I know we're talking a lot about how we break things up, but technique outweighs any of this stuff that we're talking about way more, right? I mean, we can talk about programming all we want.
Mechanics over programming. It's the greatest
every time.
Mechanics
yes.
and movement over programming.
Yeah.
And I think that's just lost in the shuffle. I think, unfortunately, with a lot of people. And, there's also the fine line, too, because you got a lot of, strength coaches that have football teams and baseball teams and things like that with a lot of players.
Yeah.
So they're not going to be able to do it as like a one-on-one session. But still even within that, though, it's like there could be a lot more, I think, improvement on the of improving on the mechanics than just the program.
Yeah.
I've seen so many people just by default, mechanics go out the window and it's just the programming.
Yeah.
Then get to the mechanics.
Yeah.
No, needs to go here and then to there. Programming is very important. It's very useful. But if you're not moving right, if you're not doing the stuff right, to me, it's just what's the point?
Because you can be on the world's greatest program, but if your technique stinks, the program's going to do nothing for you. And you can be on essentially a mediocre program, and if your technique is perfectly locked in, you're going to get great results. Especially if you include the big 7 movements and focus on quality of technique, you're going to get a good majority of the benefits. The things we're going over are going to allow people to get an extra 5 or 10% out of their workouts rather than just randomly going through the big 7. We're trying to provide some structure here. And one thing that we've noticed over the years is that the better someone's form is, the less important programming and periodization, which goes back to programming, the less important those become, because every rep they do is therapeutic rather than contra-therapeutic. If you're doing a lot of contra-therapeutic reps, meaning damaging to the body, you're going to have to take many steps.
Got to do a lot more assistant exercise, a lot more of those extra special ones to be able to combat those things and be able to keep flowing, and then go on your schedule, go with your work schedule, whoever you are in your life journey with working out and things like that.
Exactly.
So it just, again, I think it also goes back to what I like to call like the efficiency.
Yeah.
Being able to work out and do your thing. Like it just, it takes more time, more volume, unnecessarily.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's unnecessarily.
Exactly.
It's not like you have to do it like that.
Well, if you did a squat wrong, then it's like, man, I need to go do 4 corrective exercises, like you said, to combat the effects of what I just did on the squat. But if you do the squat right, you don't have to go do those corrective exercises.
That'll be eliminated.
Exactly.
If you locked in mechanics, more in the programming, and then the programming, then you can fit in the program from there.
Exactly. We already talked about the exercise variety. Like I said, throw it in periodically. You don't need to make it a mainstay, but throw it in periodically to challenge your cognition and mental engagement, and you'll actually not only build more cognitive reserve, but you'll master your movement to a higher level. And in the book, we got the templates in terms of what people can look at to help them structure things even more. But it's relatively simple. I always say there's no such thing as a perfect program, but there is such thing as perfect form. Yeah. So emphasize form, programming secondary, like we said.
Yeah, and that just goes also real quick. You're into your gains, your strength gains, and your power and things like that. Because my neuromuscular advancement is going here. Yeah, that's going to be able to allow me to lift 5 to 10% more weight. Yeah. What's that going to do? That's going to produce more strength, produce more power and growth and whatever you're doing. So it also makes sure that people know that it comes into that family of things.
Absolutely.
And you also feel good. Back to what I always keep saying, where's the negative?
Well, I think you nailed a very important point, is that improved neuromuscular efficiency, like you were saying.
For sure, exactly. And I think with that, when you add that little extra 5 to 10%, because of that neuromuscular efficiency in each exercise and in each workout, you're going to have what I like, the daily deposits, like the workout deposits. Each and every time you come in the weight room and you're doing strength training, because of that efficiency, you're going to maximize and just be a little bit more than somebody else if you were the same stature and size and things like that as compared to them, because you're advancing in that each and every time. Exactly. So you're going to maximize also like your genetic potential.
Yeah. Well, honestly, no, that's a great point. I would say I've come a little bit closer to maximizing my genetic potential for strength and size, and a lot of our clients who we've been working with as well, like Leslie and even Ben and Rami, they've probably come closer to maximizing their genetic potential than most people who train have, because of their neuromuscular efficiency. So if you want to improve strength, you want to improve muscle mass, You want to improve power, athletic performance, improving neuromuscular efficiency, which is everything we've been talking about.
That's right.
That's what we've been talking about. So, guys, I think that should wrap up chapter 6 and 7. Like I said, go check out my free book, Movement Redefined Fundamentals. It's not long.
You've heard me say that before. I'll say it again. It's not long. Awesome read.
Quick read. It's free. No strings attached. It's there at advancedhumanperformance.com. Our next several podcasts we have coming up, I would say more than that. We have some pretty crazy, riveting topics that we're going to be going over. So get ready for that. We're kind of, we got some good stuff to go over with that. So anyways, that should do it. That's a wrap, guys.